I would like to invite the following distinguished panelists on stage. First, Professor Sanjay Kumar, Director, Center for the Study of Developing Societies, New Delhi, India. Next, Mr. Kunda Dixit, Editor and Publisher, Nepali Times, Nepal. And Professor Riaz Hassan, Visiting Research Professor, Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS. The session will be chaired by Professor Robin Jeffrey, Visiting Research Professor, Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS. I now hand over the session to Professor Jeffrey.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session, which it's a great honor to chair because it's a panel with three of the most distinguished people you could possibly encounter. Two of them people I've wanted to meet. One of them I've known for a very long time. But we have two outstanding social scientists here and a journalist who has done a great many admirable things, he and his publishing associates, over the last 20 or 30 years. So I think you're in for a very entertaining next hour and a half. And we'll follow the order, of course, that's in the program. And our first speaker will be Professor Sanjay Kumar, who has already been introduced to you from the Center for the Study of Developing Societies in Delhi, I think one of the world's leading think tanks. So Sanjay, would you begin?
As you can see the title, what I'm going to do is to present an overview of what people think about democracy in South Asia. And this would connect to some of the things which was mentioned in the morning by a couple of speakers about are there any anxieties about jobs in India or not? How do we see democracy? How do common people see democracy? I'm going to show a lot of slides, and these slides you will see a lot of data in that. And I must at least inform the audience well in advance, where is this data coming from? These are actually evidences. I work in a research institute. I don't work with a government, and my job as a researcher is to critically evaluate things. So you might find things maybe in a contrast to what many speakers in the forenoon session may have said. So the data is to support the evidence. As the data I am using as an evidence to support my argument about how do we see democracy changing, or how do we see people's perception about democracy in South Asia. So we have done, my institute along with other institutes in South Asia, where we have done 2 rounds of survey in South Asian countries. And when I say South Asian country, we actually did the study in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So this is a 5-country study. We did it twice in the last 1.5 decades. These are all nationally representative sample with a very large sample of 5,000-7,000 in each country, between 4,000 to 7,000 representative sample in each country. So what do I, so first, the basics of how do I see democracy in South Asia. Do I see democracy maturing? Do I see anxieties among the people in South Asia? My own sense is that there are some anxieties about functioning of democracy in South Asia. I don't disagree that there are anxieties, but I will come to the anxieties later on. And first I would try to highlight how do I see the democracy from people's point of view. And my own sense is that there is a reasonable level of satisfaction of the people with how democracy is functioning in South Asia. Overall, people have certain degree of satisfaction in democracy in South Asia. And why do they have reasonable level of satisfaction? Because people's expectations are minimal. And even if the government is able to meet those expectations, they feel that the democracy is working fine. So expectations are minimal, and that is why the level of satisfaction to democracy is also related to your personal economic condition. If you are well off, or if you even think that there's some little bit of improvement in your economic condition, your satisfaction with democracy is high. If you see functioning of the current government, so the attitude, opinion towards democracy is shapely large by how the government is functioning in these countries. And if people see the government is functioning even okay, then there is a reasonable degree of satisfaction with the government. People have different interpretation. The common man have different interpretation to democracy compared to what we may be reading in our textbook, or maybe the definition which we borrow from the West. What do people think about democracy in South Asia largely? And I would actually substantiate all what I am saying through the data, through the evidence from the ground. Largely, large number of people actually relate democracy to the welfare. They think, the expectations are very minimal, as I said, electricity, drinking water, housing, etc. So large number of people relate democracy to delivery of welfare, guarantee of freedom. So the expectations are minimalist, and that is why I get a sense from the studies that the level of satisfaction with democracy is reasonably high. This I have already said that. So I would switch on also the participation. People get a sense of their participation in government through voting, and it is very surprising that even though the level of satisfaction with the economic condition is reasonably high, and you would find even with the poor people may be poor in South Asia. I think approximately, if I think of the the 20% of the people in most of the South Asian countries, if I put these 5 South Asian countries together, would fit into the category of very poor. But even among them, the satisfaction with the personal economic condition is very high. So all this actually makes people reasonably satisfied with the way democracy is functioning in the country. We could have questions about freeness and fairness of elections, but largely, if we look at the 5 countries in the South Asia, elections do take place regularly, and people get an opportunity to vote every 5 years, at least once in 5 years. They get a chance to vent their anger if they have some anger, some anguish against the government. This also gives them certain degree of satisfaction that they are able to express their views, how the government is functioning. So these are basically the reasons why I see a certain degree of satisfaction of the people with the way democracy is functioning in South Asia. So now, whatever summary I presented, the evidence for all the summary. This is kind of how do people interpret democracy? When we ask this question, in your opinion, what is democracy? And you can see if we club 38 and 31%, which is welfare and justice and right to freedom. So more than almost 70% people in the South Asian country actually relate democracy to just welfare, justice and freedom. So they're not looking at, in a very theoretical manner. Just welfare, justice, freedom is what they interpret democracy. As I said, we have the data for 5 South Asian countries. There are certain differences, and you can see some of the differences. Procedural democracy, I have put these in different categories, and we can see there are certain differences. Like in Sri Lanka, a lot of people put huge emphasis on procedural democracy, but if you look at welfare and justice, Sri Lanka is low on that. But if you look at all other South Asian countries, the 4 South Asian countries, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Pakistan, welfare people, large number of people relate democracy to welfare and justice. Rights and freedom are also important for people in most of the South Asian country. Satisfaction with democracy. As I said, we have done 2 rounds of study, and you can see the level of satisfaction. Far more people are satisfied with the way democracy is functioning in these countries compared to the dissatisfaction. I'm not saying people are not dissatisfied. There are sizable number of people who are dissatisfied, and you look at the change, and that's one point of anxiety which I will mention, that while in 2003-04, roughly 64-65% people in all these 5 South Asian countries put together were satisfied with democracy. It has gone down a little bit. That's a point of anxiety, but overall more people feel satisfied with democracy compared to dissatisfaction with democracy. This is the same data disaggregate by 5 South Asian countries. You can see the trend in Bangladesh, slightly different. Bangladesh and Nepal, are on one side, while 3 other countries are on one side. Bangladesh, Nepal, proportion of people who are dissatisfied is slightly higher compared to proportion of people who are satisfied. While in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, you can see satisfaction with democracy bar is higher compared to dissatisfaction. So, and overall put all the 5 countries together, there is a reasonable degree of satisfaction of the people with democracy in with the way democracy is functioning in their country. I did mention that your economic condition shapes your opinion about how democracy is functioning. And this is the 3 situations. Those people who believe that economic condition has improved, slightly improved, among those, the satisfaction with democracy is high. You look at the second set of bar, same as before. If people believe that there has been no change in their economic condition, satisfaction goes down from 63% to 52%, and bad economic condition situation, it goes down further. And similarly, the yellow bar goes up in the reverse side. So, I did mention that people's attitude, opinion towards their economic condition, the way they think, and these are all opinion related questions. This is opinion of the people. How do people think? They think whether their economic condition has improved or not. So the economic condition of the people actually shapes your attitude towards democracy. I also mentioned the way government functions. If people are satisfied with the functioning of their government, they think democracy is working well, they are satisfied with democracy, and if they think that the government is not functioning properly, their dissatisfaction with democracy goes up, and this is the evidence for that. Among all those people who feel satisfied with the government, the satisfaction with the way democracy is functioning is very high, which is at 81%. And as soon as we see all those people who think the government is not functioning properly in their country, satisfaction goes down to 25% and dissatisfaction goes up. So people's attitude, opinions, the way they look at democracy, whether they are satisfied or dissatisfied, is guided by your economic condition, the way you perceive your economic condition, the way they think the government is functioning in their own country. Support for democracy, whether you support democracy or a dictatorship, a huge support for democratic form of government, but we see some proportion, a small proportion, roughly about 10-12% in the South Asian country, the 5 South Asian country which I mentioned, also support dictatorship, but still a huge majority, more than 65, roughly about 60-65%, which is 2/3. And you may not add up the data to form 100 because there are other people who said we have no opinion or I have no preference for any particular form of government. So, and this is again the same set of data, support for democracy, whether people prefer democracy or you prefer a dictatorial form of government put by different countries. And you can see in all the countries except in Pakistan, where you have kind of, like competition between whether people would like a dictatorial authoritarian government or a democracy, but in all other countries, in Sri Lanka, it's very high at touching about 90%, in Bangladesh, India. So there is a preference for democratic form of government, even if we are a little critical about how the way democracy is functioning, but overall there is a huge preference for democratic form of government compared to any other form of government. There was a mention about trust in institution in the morning, and this is the data for that. The trust in institution is very high. People have anxieties about people who are running those institutions or people who are responsible for running those institutions. But look at the trust in institution. The institution which was mentioned in the morning was Election Commission. I have not put the data for Election Commission, but look at the trust in Parliament, Judiciary, Army, political parties, which is much lower compared to Parliament, police, civil services. There is a reasonable degree of trust in all these institutions, and you can see it is a comparative picture of 2 years between 2003-5 and 2013. There is some decline, but overall there is a reasonable degree of trust of the people in the institution, and this is again by different countries. You can see that in Army, in Judiciary, since there is no parliament, when we did the study in Nepal, so we don't have that bar for parliament, but this cuts across all the countries. It's not lopsided. It's not that trust in institution is high in one country and low in other country. It cuts across all the South Asian country with a very reasonable degree. People have trust in democracy because they also think that there should be a decentralized model of government, and there is a support for government should be actually considering opinion of the ordinary citizen. So there is a support for that. In every country, people believe that how should the government function? The government should function because the way that they should be consulting the opinion of they should be consulting the people. And the sense of people's involvement in democracy is very limited. They only think that if you get a chance to vote, that's good enough a process of consultation. Level of political participation is reasonable. It's not that people are participating in electoral process. We may have questions about electoral freeness and fairness of electoral process, but you can look at the figures that people have reasonable degree of participation in political processes. And when I say political processes, these are 4 bars. The green bar is for no participation, the yellow is low participation, the purple bar is moderate participation, and the last one, the dark green, is high participation. And this index is based on few things which we asked about participation, whether you vote, whether you participate in rallies, are you a member of political party. We asked several questions, and putting all questions together, we develop an index to figure out what proportion of people would fall in which category. Yes, very high participation is not very high. It's roughly in the range of say 8, 9, 10%. But look at the 2 middle bar, the yellow bar and the purple bar, which is low participation and moderate participation. So people do participate in electoral processes, political processes, which also gives them a sense of involvement in the government making process. This actually results in reasonable degree of satisfaction with democracy. This is again similar kind of a data. People who are keen to take part in decision making process, you see some differences. All those people who think that it is important to participate in decision making process, among them satisfaction with democracy is high, and people who are not keen in taking part in decision making process, preference for democracy is low. So as I mentioned earlier also, if people get a chance to participate in electoral processes, participate in decision making process, so all those people have preference for democracy. People who don't think that my vote is important, why I should participate in election, among them preference for democracy is low, and it is high among them the preference for a dictatorial form of government is slightly higher. You can see from 8 to 16. But I should also highlight, these are all positives about what's people's opinion about democracy. I should also mention some of the anxieties. It's not that there are no anxieties in the mind of the people in South Asia about democracy. There are anxieties. You must have noticed in the data that the support is high, but it has declined during last 1 decade. There is the other anxiety is that support for democracy is on the decline, and support for an alternative form of government, which is dictatorship, you must have noticed in the previous slide, it has gone up. So that's another anxiety. That's a matter of concern among South Asian people. Educated and urban people are more critical about democracy, and we know these are the opinion makers. So that's another anxiety. People expect government to fulfill welfare activities. Expectations are minimalist, but still there are some things which government is unable to fulfill, which makes people anxious or dissatisfied with the government. Decline in personal economic condition. Reasonable degree of satisfaction with personal economic condition, but we also see some decline in that. Unemployment and poverty. There was some mention about unemployment. I'm going to show some data on that. Unemployment and growing poverty is another anxiety about democracy. And now to end with this data. This data is only for India. I don't have the data for 5 South Asian countries. And this is the last slide. Look at satisfaction with personal economic condition, and there was a mention about what is happening in the last 4 or 5 years. As I said, this is only about India. Look at satisfied with personal financial condition. Reasonable satisfaction still, but look at proportion of people who are dissatisfied and proportion of people who are satisfied. Dissatisfied has gone up from 36% to 41%, and satisfied remains more or less the same. So dissatisfaction has grown. Biggest problem, look at no jobs, unemployment. In 2013, it was 13% who said unemployment, no job is the big problem. It has gone up to 28%. There was a mention of several other studies that there is no anxieties about unemployment. I can see from these surveys which we have been conducting, and these are very large scale surveys. These are only India based, and these have 20,000, 30,000 sample nationally spread. We can clearly see that unemployment is a major concern. So this is another concern. Development. There was a lot of mention about development. Yes, there has been development, but sizable number of people believe that the development is being cornered by the rich people. It has not gone to the poor. I'm not saying that everybody has that opinion, but sizable number of people have this view that development, yes, there was all mention about big city, smart city, but for whom? For the rich people, not for the poor. There was no mention about the poor. I think there is a concern among the poor, not only in India, but across South Asian countries. I think I will skip. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come back when we've finished all 3 panels for the question and answer session. So let me now invite Kunda Dixit to take the podium and discuss Nepal. He comes from, as I said earlier, one of the most distinguished media organizations in South Asia in terms of what it's achieved over many years, and particularly in relation to the difficulties it's often had to face.
Thank you, Robin. It's a very cruel thing to do to a journalist, to make him stand up here. We belong down there, and that's where we usually sit and report on academics, white-haired ones, and grill them with questions. But nevertheless, I've been a foreign correspondent now for 30 years. I edit a paper back home in Nepal, and a lot of us are worried about the challenges that media and democracy face in South Asia and around the world today. Truths that we thought were self-evident are being challenged. New technologies are making the press irrelevant. The media business model has collapsed. The erosion of press freedom is eroding democracy. In our own neighborhood, we have seen the rise of the alt-right, the world's largest democracy, with a strong tradition of press freedom. There are trolls and vigilantes on the loose. They are threatening journalists and even killing them. The Philippines has elevated a self-confessed death squad leader to the office of president. Turkey's elected president has unleashed a draconian crackdown on journalists and dissidents. After Brexit, there has been a rise of the wrong right in Europe. Just when we thought America's president couldn't tweet anything more shocking anymore, he surprises us every morning. Western democracies come with a design defect. They permit the unrestricted freedom to express the most extreme and despicable views. Populist politicians use this to stoke xenophobic fears about immigration, crime, and terrorism. The mass media can then be whipped up at election time. Democracy can therefore be used to elect demagogues. Despots exploit the disarray among traditional democratic political establishment and their own lack of accountability and chronic failure to deliver development and services. And once they get elected to power, they proceed to dismantle the very institutions of democracy that got them there. Germany, of course, saw all this happen in the 1930s, And in a recent op-ed, Jochen Bittner of the German newspaper Die Zeit called the present worldwide anti-democratic wave orderism. It is based on our fear of disorder and chaos. It offers stability over freedom. He compared orderism to the promise of utopia under communism, and he said, it's only a fig leaf for tyranny. The enemy of orderism is, of course, liberal democracy. And it is in this the Putins, the Trumps, the Dutertes, and the Erdogans of the world have a mutual admiration society. In South Asia, there's been a yearning for strongman rule that stems from an unaccountable elite that has rigged the system to get elected over and over again. Dynastic politicians and reckless rulers have contributed to political instability and democratic decay, and South Asians envy the order they see in East Asia. As Professor Sanjay Kumar's survey showed, many in South Asia are fed up with the squalor of our cities, the crumbling infrastructure, and the endemic corruption. Yet we still believe in democracy. However, we look longingly at Malaysia, Singapore, or China as role models. There is a belief that East Asia's limited democracy is a better formula for economic growth. But back home, we've all tried strongman rule before, and our experience has not been very encouraging. In fact, our strong men, and sometimes women, have tended to be as corrupt and as despotic as our elected leaders. The only time South Asian countries had the least corrupt and most accountable leadership, ironically, is when we've had interim electoral governments made up of unelected technocrats. You have to be really, really lucky to have a Lee Kuan Yew who showed that a visionary leader could be accountable even with limited democracy. Malaysia's Prime Minister, who's dissolving parliament today, maybe even as we speak, is not really a role model. Every day there is growing evidence that the election upset in the US and other countries was due to manipulation of media, especially social media at election time. Post-truth journalism was out of sync with the masses. The social web was hijacked by bots and fake news sites. Facebook in particular has come under intense scrutiny for doing nothing about its toxic ecosystem of falsification. Even before the recent revelations about Cambridge Analytica and how it stole and sold personal data for targeted messaging, at election time it was clear that Facebook was a part of the problem. This has led some to question the media's adherence to the doctrine of false equivalence, the journalism rule under which reporters are required to give equal weight to both sides in an argument, even when one side is deliberately lying or saying something incendiary. This mantra of objectivity is now being challenged with the argument that it is more important to be truthful than to be neutral. This soul-searching comes at a time when media and everywhere is under siege. It has either been forced by commercialization to abandon its public service remit, or it's being seriously challenged by hate content on the social web. The word demagogue comes from a perfectly wholesome Greek word for a leader of the people, I've just learned. It took on this derogatory meaning only because the Athenian upper class looked down on the proletariat. Demagogues today are able to manipulate media at election time to whip up chauvinism, intolerance, and journalists who adhere to rules of objectivity lose their relevance in this frightening Orwellian combination of 1984 and Animal Farm. The emperor doesn't like it when we point out that he's naked. Power doesn't like it when you speak truth to it. And power tries to intimidate and harm the messenger. Government agencies controlled by elected autocrats have also become smarter. They have learned that jailing journalists attracts needless international attention, so they have refined their methods. Censorship today is achieved by behind-the-scenes threats, which can be even more insidious and sinister. It was easier to deal with old-fashioned censorship. At least you knew who the enemy was, and we took it as our noble duty to defend democracy and free press against them. But what do you do when the threats to press freedom do not happen in a totalitarian state, but in elected democracies where legislature and the judiciary have all been compromised and co-opted? When the central values of democracy and press freedom are threatened, journalists have to take on an activistic role, because we're not just defending our own freedom, but the citizens' right to know. We in the media are just the custodians of that freedom. In my own country, Nepal, we've seen absolute monarchy, we've seen military coups, we've seen parliamentary democracy, we've seen a war, and a shaky post-conflict transition. Throughout it all, we have experienced firsthand that the threat to democracy and press freedom comes from both the extreme left and the extreme right. We've seen that that development is directly related to democracy. It is when villages, municipalities, and the national parliament have elected leaders that the chances of accountability are highest. Every development success story in Nepal in the last 30 years has got the word community in it. Community forestry, community radio, community irrigation, community-led schools, community-managed hospitals. In fact, it is at the national level where electoral legitimacy has failed to guarantee performance legitimacy. Finally, in my experience with the media, I feel the answer lies in strengthening the pillars of democracy, fortifying the institutions that serve as a critical check and balance to a failed executive. And one of the critical institutions for that has to be an independent and investigative public service media. As someone famously said, the only way to fix the problems with democracy is by making it more democratic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kunda. Let me now introduce Professor Riaz Hassan, whose biodata you can see in the program, but it's probably worth pointing out at this gathering that he was born in India, had his childhood in Pakistan, his higher education in the United States, his marriage and first job in Singapore, and has been a colleague and a resident of Australia for about the last 30 years. He's also a very fine sociologist.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robin. At the beginning of last week, I was looking forward to hearing what Professor Mohammad Wasim had to talk about politics, society, and governance in Pakistan. Then in the middle of last week, Professor Mitra Kar invited, I won't tell my other colleague, and said, you know, one of you have to do it. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here. I suppose one of the benefit of getting old is that you can say whatever you say because you're not looking for a job anymore, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I have learned a great deal about South Asia, in particular about Pakistan, during my 8 years association with the Institute of South Asian Studies. But in this particular exercise, FISA was very helpful to me putting together this outline. Now, where is that? Do we have? Can I have? Oh, sorry. So what I'm going to do is to basically share with you some ideas that I'm quite convinced about, but I'm going to test them with you and see how you feel. Over the last 50 years as a teacher, as a university teacher, as a sociologist, I've become quite fascinated by two factors, the geography and demography, as factors in moving history, in determining the destiny of human beings and the destiny of civilization. And so, needless to say, since I'm very interested in geography and demography as factors in moving human destiny, as shaping human destiny, I'll begin my my presentation with talking about that. This is briefly the outline of of what I'm going to say. I'll begin by looking at the geography and demography of Pakistan and the implication it has for the governance of the country, for international relations, and as well as for national cohesion. And I'll then move on to the demographic aspect and look at some of the demographic feature of Pakistani population, and then move on to the other four topics: Islamization and trust in institutions, which have been actually to some extent covered by Professor Sanjay Kumar, and then the challenge of terrorism Pakistan faces and the perception of biggest problems. I think most of you probably know what the geography of Pakistan looks like. But let me just give you briefly the definition of the state. According to Montevideo Convention, a state is a permanent population, has a defined territory, has a government which is capable of maintaining law and order, and is capable of conducting international relations with other states. This is the geography of Pakistan. Now, obviously, none of you will find this surprising. You have seen this map many times over. But what you may not have seen is that how do people who inhabit Pakistan, what is the situation in terms of the nation that makes up Pakistan? And this is the distribution of population that makes up Pakistan. And the most important thing I'd like you to see is that Pakistan is one of the few countries where almost every ethnic group that makes up Pakistan is divided between 2 or 3 countries. The nations which make up Pakistan actually are nations which are actually divided into 2, possibly, and in the case of Pashtun, 3 countries. Let's look at the division, how this is actually. One of the missing thing is the Urdu speaking, but the 5 nations that make up Pakistan, Punjabis are divided. Majority of them live in Pakistan, in Punjab, but then about 20% live in India. Pashtuns, the total Pashtun population in the world is about 42 million. And they say their country is Afghanistan. But the actual number of Pashtuns who live in Afghanistan is 14 million. 28 million Pashtuns, almost 30 million now, live in Pakistan. So the interesting issue is, very often people, when they talk about Afghanistan's problem, they forget Pakistan is the home to the majority of the Pashtun population. And if you take Balochistan, majority of the Balochis, and which they cover a huge amount of area, majority of them live in Pakistan, and 20% live in Iran, and about 10% live in Afghanistan. So you have the Balochis, who make up about 10 million of the total, who are altogether about 10 million, and they are actually divided into 3 countries. Kashmiris, divided between India and Pakistan, 20% Pakistan, 80% roughly in India. And then the Urdu-speaking people. I was looking at the actual distribution of Urdu-speaking people, and there are 66 million Urdu-speaking people whose native tongue is Urdu. About 6 to 8 million live in Pakistan, the rest live in India and various other countries. Now, the issue, but the point I wanted to bring to your attention, here is a country, a geographical reality, which is inhabited by 200 million people. And these 200 million people actually make up 5 nations, and these 5 nations actually are divided between different, with other countries, the bordering countries. Now that must be a very important factor in determining the destiny and the consequences that follow from this kind of diversity for the country as a whole. Now, what are the consequences of that? It has enormous implications for the governance of Pakistan. And the implications are that, first of all, a nation state must have two characteristics. There are two features which are universal: sovereignty and territorial integrity. And the people who are custodian of these two features of nation state, for the maintaining these two features of nation state, are the army, and of course the government. But the army, in the case of Pakistan, has been destined to play a very important and difficult role, because they are the defenders of the territorial integrity of Pakistan, which actually is very complicated because of the population that make up Pakistan. And they are very important, they're very integral, they are very central to helping the government to maintain the sovereignty of the country. Now, as you know, Pakistan today is not what Pakistan was in 1947. So Pakistan has had a number of military conflicts, and these conflicts are, most of you know, Bangladesh independence war, conflict in Kashmir, and continuous conflict in Afghanistan since 1979, and Balochistan and tribal areas. I don't think there are that many countries in the world which actually have had the number of conflicts and the complexity of these conflicts in which a number of other international actors are involved. And the primary role in these conflicts have been that of the army armies obviously had to fight these and to maintain the law and order. And then, as a result, army has been very central by virtue of the nature of geography and demography, not because of the army as an institution, by virtue of the nature of demography and geography of Pakistan, army has become has played a very central role. In fact, I was reading Anatol Lieben's book, and it echoed some of the comments that I heard when I was doing my research on suicide terrorism in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Israel. And army, there was to put it very simply, no army, no Pakistan. That's simple. That is actually the point that you often hear among the Pakistani army. No army, no Pakistan. And this probably not unique to army people, but as a result of that, as you know, Pakistani army has had quite an important political role, whether they were welcomed or not, but they have, half the time they have been the rulers of the country. And they have had very important, it has shaped the Pakistan's political culture. I don't believe that military rules can ever develop democratic institutions. I think they are actually counterproductive. But nevertheless, as Pakistan's destiny has been shaped by the circumstances, army has played a very important role. And therefore, it has a very important role in determining international relations of Pakistan and the security relations of Pakistan. You can't explain Pakistan's foreign policy and Pakistan's security policy without actually understanding military concerns. And as a result of that, there are very tense relationships from time to time between army and civilian governments. And I'm not really, I don't want to dwell on it, but many of you will know, but there have been, and there are still very serious tensions between military and civilian institutions. Now, what does it mean? How do people in Pakistan feel about the military and civilian relationship? And interestingly, if this is the survey done December last year, and you ask people, would you trust in democracy or military dictatorship? And you can see from this that majority of people, 81%, prefer democracy in Pakistan. In spite of all that, and I think it confirms more comments that you have already shared with us, the majority of the Pakistanis will say they prefer democracy and not a military rule. Now let me go to the population of Pakistan, which is the other very important determining factor of Pakistan's society, governance, and governance. Pakistan's population is 207 million. And what is like India, probably even more so than India, 51% of Pakistanis are below the age of 24. And they are going to have enormous implication how Pakistani society evolves. In fact, they are already playing a very important role in determining the electoral processes in Pakistan. The other thing which is important is that this population is becoming rapidly urbanized, as it was pointed out previously. And young people in the cities, in search of job, in search of destiny, in search of a future that they can rely on, I think is going to be the major political challenge for the government of Pakistan. But there are other aspects which I think important. In spite of all that, how is Pakistani government is managing human affairs? These are some of the standard indicators that we use that I was able to put together, and you can look at them. You can see that majority of the, there has been over the last several years, the last 25 years, there have been actually a fairly consistent improvement in per capita income of Pakistanis. Life expectancy has gone up from 60 to 64. Mortality rate, which is probably the most sensitive indicator of development, has improved significantly. Maternal mortality has declined. Improved sanitation has taken place, and the mean years of schoolings have gone up. Pakistan still is lagging behind woefully, but at least it is moving in the right direction. Literacy rates have improved, but I should also mention, in many of these indicators, Pakistan is lagging behind Bangladesh and India. Things are improving in Pakistan, but not at the same speed as they have, particularly in certain areas in Bangladesh, with one exception, sanitation. Sanitation is the only place where Pakistan has done better than its neighbors. Now, apart from geography and demography, culture plays a very important role in Pakistani society, both in shaping political culture and the governance. I think the governor, we had a very interesting observation from the minister this morning, and earlier on I think there were some questions on it. Pakistani Islam is essentially a part of South Asian Islam, and South Asian Islam is primarily a Sufi Islam, an Islam which actually owes a great deal for taking roots in the subcontinent to shrines, to Sufi shrines. And these Sufi shrines have played an important role. Because of their influence, they were co-opted by the government and they were given large land grants, jagir. And consequently, over a period of time, there's a social structure developed in South Asian society and in Pakistan, the Zamindar Peer Alliance, Landlord Peer Alliance. And that is the core of Pakistan's social structure. And just to give you an idea, in as recently as I think 2007, 65% of the land was owned by 5% big landlords. And most of them, these are the big Peer Zamindar landlords. And almost 2/3 of all Pakistani in the National Assembly, the 2/3 of the seats in Pakistan National Assembly was actually occupied by Peer Zamindar Alliance. This is the other side, a kind of Pakistani face of feudalism, which is gradually being changing, being eroded gradually as a result of higher literacy, modernity, as well as urbanization. But the main opponent of the Sufi Islam are the ulamas. Ulamas are the leaders of the scripturalistic Islam. And historically, they have been urban-based, and they have been actually, they didn't have the kind of power that the Zimidar Peer Alliance had. So consequently, the conflict has developed between these two traditions of Islam. Only one country where the popular tradition and the scriptural tradition has roughly equal power is Indonesia. Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama are two organizations in Indonesia. Both have 40 million members, and you can't really, they know that if they fight with each other, the chances are that Indonesia would not survive. In Pakistan's case, the ulamas have been trying to actually assert their power. They want to Islamize, they want to actually bring about a more orthodox version of Islam. And that has been the very important part which has given rise to sectarianism and conflict in Pakistan. Islamization in Pakistan is not a conflict between Islam and the West. Islamization is a conflict within Islam, between the popular Islam, Sufi Islam, and Islam of the ulama, Islam of the text. One of the points that I often hear is that Pakistan is jihad central. Everybody in Pakistan is ready to go to jihad. Now this index of religious practice, I can give you a huge amount of data. I have spent last 20 years studying religiosity in these countries. Now if you look at this data, you can see how religious Pakistanis are. In fact, they are far less religious than Indonesian and Egyptians and even Malaysians. So there is a popular view that Pakistan is jihad central, Pakistan is extremely orthodox, is becoming extremely orthodox. But compared to all the major countries that I have, some of the countries, in Singapore, of course not, Singapore, India, I added because they're the last two countries I studied. But the point I wanted to make is that Pakistan actually is not as religious, as not the most religious country in the world. Pakistan is becoming religious. Yes, with literacy, religiosity goes up, and Pakistan will become probably more religious. But at this point in time, it is a middle-of-range country. It's not one of the jihad central, as it is very often claimed. Now, given the importance of religion, does it affect voting behavior of Pakistanis? You would think that if religion was the determining factor in the political and social aspirations of Pakistanis, they will vote for religious parties. What this data shows, that in fact religious parties do woefully badly in Pakistan. They have never won. The only time religious party won more than 10% of the vote was in 2002 election. They had 12% of the vote. They were all allied together under MMA, and they won 20% of the seats. Since then, they have been going down. In fact, in last election, they had, I think, 5% of the vote, or 2% of the seats. But the point I want to make, that majority of the Pakistanis, when it comes to voting, they vote for center-right, centrist, and center-left parties. They do not vote for Islamic parties. And there is no way Islamic party will ever win an open election in Pakistan, at least on the basis of evidence that I have presented. And this, again, the same thing. Pakistan's constitution has I was quite intrigued when Prime Minister Sharif was disqualified by the constitution. And then I looked at the Pakistan's constitution. I'm not a scholar I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional lawyer or scholar, but I was really surprised as a sociologist that the Pakistan constitution provides anybody the ammunition to go and claim to say that one of the members of parliament actually do not qualify to be member of parliament. I'm sure, I hope, I don't want to name the person, but there's one prominent member of Pakistan. Somebody can say, oh, he's not an observant Muslim, he has not done all the things that he's supposed to do in order to be member of parliament. I was pleasantly surprised. I'm not sure. This is Islamization policies were actually, this constitution was Bhutto's constitution, 1973, and it was reinforced with some of the clauses by Zia. So there is Islamization has been to some extent used as a political vehicle by the leaders in order to boost their appeal to the masses. But the Islamization actually has delivered very little benefit to the country, except it has created more divisions, it has created more disability, more instability, and also affected the social cohesion. But at the same time, an average Pakistani remains very devoutly attached to the faith. And there's something you can see if you visit Pakistan. Now, finally, the final two observations, the trust in institution. Army still remains the most trusted institution in Pakistan. And the government remains the least government institution. After that, ulamas have actually gained a greater prestige in the public opinion. This is the 2017 survey, Gallup survey. In my survey, the ulamas had only 40% of support, but obviously the ulama have gained support, and there are a number of reasons I'm happy to tell you, but I don't want to dwell on, because it's basically when religion and politics are divided, fused together, the religious institution decline in public trust. When they are separate, religious institutions actually gain in public trust. A point that I'd be happy to develop. Otherwise, you can refer to any of the books that you probably in one of the books, number of books that I have said that. But the important thing is that there are problems in Pakistan. The problems are the army is still trusted, and government institutions, with the exception of courts, are relatively weak. Another point that is very often mentioned, that Pakistan is really ravaged by terrorism, and Pakistan government is unable, and I'm sure you will hear more about it, to deal with Pakistan terrorist challenge. Now this is the terrorist violence in Pakistan. I'll just go back to, you can see that actually terrorist violence in Pakistan has been, one graph shows the bomb blast, the other one shows that suicide terrorism. They actually have been declining over the last 25 years. So there's something going on in Pakistan which is affecting this trend. And trend begins in 2007, and in 2007, a large number of military soldiers, military personnel were killed, and the military became very alarmed. And I remember one researcher telling me that when they were doing research about finding wives for the military officers in particularly areas where a lot of military is recruited from, many people did not want their daughters to be married to military officers because so many of them are being killed in the violence that was taking place. I mean, this is one of the examples how it was affected. Then military actually began to take action, and you can see from 2007 to 2014, there was quite a significant elevation in suicide terrorism and military deaths. And all in all, the point I want to make is that there were 62,000 deaths in these years as a result of terrorism, of which 22,000 were civilians and 7,000 were military personnel. And 33,000 were actually terrorists. Again, the definition of terrorism and all that, who are the terrorists. But the point is that there is, again, a point that, how much? Sure, I'm finished. And again, so this is, when you ask Pakistanis what is the biggest problem, and biggest problem for Pakistanis, this is a 2017 December survey, Pakistanis see problem, primarily economic problem. Unemployment is the most important, and then inflation, and then after that, it is corruption. These three problems account for more than 50% of the problems. But actually security, law and order actually they appear, but they are not as prominent as you will probably see them reported in the press. Now let me conclude by making some general observation. Anatole Lieven, in his book, Pakistan, a Hard Country, says Pakistan is seen as a divided, disorganized, economically backward, corrupt, violent, unjust, often savagely oppressive towards poor and women, and home to extremely dangerous form of extremism and terrorism. I mean, with this role of infirmities, I don't think really you want to visit Pakistan. But the point is that Pakistan is also, on the basis of just, I hope, on the basis of just what I have said, Pakistan is also a country in many ways surprisingly resilient, and it seems to be able to manage its affairs in a way that it can actually be counted as a very reliable partner in international political system. Future of Pakistan depends on relationship between India and Pakistan. And I think if the army and the politicians of these two countries can realize that at the end game is there are going to be no winners. Because if Pakistan becomes less stable, it is bad news for India and bad news for the region. So ultimate destiny of both India and Pakistan and the region, and I would say South Asia as a whole and the world as a whole, depends upon a relationship between India and Pakistan, and primarily a relationship that is based on mutual respect and some kind of give and take that will eventually serve not only these institutions but also improve the economic, political, and social life of their citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Riaz. We're now open for questions, comments. As the message came across this morning, please keep the questions concise and the comments relatively brief, unless you're saying something very, very wise. We'll take a group of 3 or 4. Dr. Sen at the back of the room, and Professor Mitra, and Dr. Singh, and yes, Mr. Kunda.
Thank you, Robin. I have a couple of quick questions for Sanjay. One related to India and the other more generally related to South Asia. The first is when you were talking about trust in institutions, you actually said that the trust in Parliament, and this is specific to India, seems to be higher than political parties, which are the least trusted institutions across South Asia. So how would you explain this? Since Parliament comprises of political party and politicians, why is Parliament, why is there a greater faith reposed in Parliament vis-a-vis political parties? And the second is a question regarding the difference in opinion between the trust reposed in democracy vis-a-vis dictatorships, and what your findings showed is that many more people have faith in democracy as compared to dictatorship in South Asia. But could you say a little bit about, and this ties in with Kunda's presentation about elected authoritarians, and I think the SDSA survey, the earlier edition, also had some data which you might not have shown today on the popularity of elected authoritarians, even though a lot of people have faith in democracy, but a lot of people in South Asia also have faith in authoritarian leaders. Thank you.
And Professor Mitra.
We are here to talk about emerging South Asia, And it would be nice to know if there is a consensus in the panel about emerging democracy in South Asia. Is South Asia becoming more democratic? The second question would be a specific one to Sanjay about India. Is India becoming more democratic and less liberal? Or is there an inverse relationship between democracy and liberalism? Or can a majority turn illiberal and there will be no democratic way out of it? The third question will be to Prof. Riaz. Thank you very much for having allowed me democratically to pressurize into making this presentation. And in fairness, I have heard from you things today which I have not heard before, because you have not really talked about Pakistan before, and it refers to your reading of Anatole Levin's book. It's a contradictory book, isn't it? On the one hand, it shows the sort of bloody-minded resolve of Pakistan to stay together, or Pakistanis to stick out for their country. A kind of Pakistani way of measuring the Pakistan-ness of Pakistan. You can't fault Pakistanis on wanting to be Pakistanis and defending their country. But look at Pakistan from outside, using categories which are not endogenous to Pakistan but exogenous to Pakistan, the Anatole Levin categories. There Pakistan doesn't measure out. In other words, are we, in trying to understand democracy in Pakistan, also understanding the limitations of the liberal democratic ways of measuring democratization outside of the Judeo-Christian ethical communities?
That sounds good. Yeah. When you're the director, you get 3 questions. You see the Depinder.
Thank you, Robin. Just a couple of quick questions for me. The first two are directed at Mr. Dixit. You started off with a fairly bleak prognosis, saying that mainstream media is dead. And what we do observe today, if I characterize in the North American context, for instance, just as an illustration, there are people who read the New York Times, there are people who read the Guardians, and that's it, and a few liberals online media. There are others who find their homes purely in Breitbart and Fox and whatever else it's generated. For the media person, is it becoming a case increasingly of preaching to the converted? Are there hopes or mechanisms through which you can straddle this divide at all? And where do you see, I mean, if you were to gaze into a crystal ball, do you see avenues for engagement across? And the second point is about fake news. This has been in existence for a long time. It's just acquired a very pejorative connotation from Washington recently. Within the press, and this is a major case in India recently, how do you see it being addressed by the media? Is there a compact that can evolve? And we have a quick question for Professor Hassan. The point you made a point upon Sufi Islam being dominant, and that's a strand which has appeal across faiths, music, culture, whatever, and other forms and poetry. The main threat you mentioned came from scripturalistic Islam. Are you alluding to Wahhabi and Salafist? And if that's the case, where is this strand gaining currency, gaining a foothold amongst the broader public? What are the conditions that are enabling it to gain a solid footing and lead to all the consequences? Thank you.
Thank you. And the fourth question for this package.
A very short question for Mr. Dixit. Nepal politics, why is it been so so much of instability we have been seeing in the democratic setup since the changeover, and what is the role of the left movement in Nepal?
Now, how are we going to handle those? We have one question for the whole panel, which is the one about emerging democracy in South Asia. We might leave that one for the very end in about 10 minutes' time and give individual panelists a chance to respond to their questions for now. And we might begin with Sanjay. I hope you've been very careful in noting down your questions. Thank you. It's there, just needs to be coming up.
When we try and evaluate, say, an institution, or even when we watch a film and when we come back and we try and analyze things, when we analyze an institution with, say, oh, one particular aspect is good, bad, etc. So how do we evaluate democracy? There could be different lenses of evaluating democracy. My primary lens of evaluating democracy and whether it is successful, democratic, less democratic, more democratic, is elections and participation of the people in electoral processes. Because I think in order to have a democracy, elections are important. If you don't have elections, if people don't have right to vote, if there are no political parties, I think there's no democracy. So my primary lens of evaluating democracy is through elections and participation. And I would pick that question which you said, we'll leave it at the end. But I would say on behalf of India, I think India is becoming more democratic now in terms of this, because on various aspects of political participation and across caste community, across gender, more and more people are participating. And I keep saying that this is a big revolution in Indian electoral participation, that women are actually turning out to vote in such a large number now. There are 8-9 states in India where women have outnumbered men in terms of voting. And these are not states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Haryana. These are states like Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, all the backward states. So in terms of that, I think democracy has penetrated in India, and maybe that's happening in other parts of South Asian countries as well. This is connecting to the other question Professor Mitra asked. So do we see India becoming more democratic, or what is the relationship between majority turning less liberal, more liberal? We are becoming more democratic, but majority turning out to be less liberal. If we see what is happening in the country during last 4 years, we get that sense that maybe majority community, though we have become more democratic, participate. And when I say we have become more democratic, on the indicator which I mentioned, yes, we are more democratic. But at the same time, what is happening in the country during last 3-4 years, I would say yes, the majority community has become less liberal. But I don't think that this is going to continue for many years. We don't see a pattern in that. This I would see maybe a phase in Indian democracy which we are witnessing. We might come back to what I would call a normal situation. I consider this a slightly abnormal situation at the time and I get this sense, a huge majority of people have become far less liberal now, and small issues and there is a huge anxieties. Now going back to Rananjay Sen question on why trust in parliament is higher and why do we see less trust in political party, and if we ask about politician, so actually you will see a graph. Parliament trust would be higher, slightly less would be political party, far less would be political leaders. And that is what I did mention a little bit, that trust in institutions is still high. So they think parliament is fine. Maybe the way political parties are running the parliament, the way political actors who belong to political party, they are running the parliament, that's not the proper way. And that is why we see trust in political parties low. And as I said, if you look at the trust in political leaders, it is far less. So trust in parliament remains low, and we have been asking this question over a period of time. I did not present over a period of time, but trust in parliament has always remained very high, reasonably high. You rightly pointed out that we do see a trend that even among those people who trust democracy or who have strong faith in democracy, even among them, there are sizable number of people, especially during last 10 years, 5-10 years, that they would prefer democracy, they would support democracy, but at the same time, they would also like to see a strong leader. So kind of an element of dictatorial form of leadership within an elected government, that's the hint we got from our two studies, and I think this has actually got articulated during last 4-5 years. Strong leader has become very important in the mind of Indian people at this moment during, I would say, last 5-7 years. We have no idea whether this is going to continue unless until we see the trend continuing for the next 5-7 years. But yes, at the moment, support for democracy, at the same time support for an authoritarian kind of leadership within the democratic sector.
Thank you.
To answer your question on the media, it is pretty bleak, I think, and the despondency within the media among journalists is heightened by the fact that there is such economic fragility within publishing houses and established media because of the whole, the erosion of advertising, migration of eyeballs to online, and the whole the challenge of revenue generation has meant that the economic fragility has translated into political dependence, and that has eroded media's independence. It has meant that they are overly dependent on commercial interests, which has again come back to erode the credibility. And it does feel like the established media is preaching to the Pope, because these are already people who believe in those liberal values. And the challenge is to get away from the fragmentation of media and the fact that you can now only read what you agree with, and the echo chamber that it has generated. The bright side of it, and maybe the silver lining, is that established papers like the New York Times and the Guardian have actually added readership in the last year and a half. Like the New York Times has, I think, added 1 million new subscribers, which actually means revenue as well. And that there seems to be a certain backlash to the shift to the right. And I think the recent study about Twitter and the fact that negative news and are retweeted more, the rumors and fake news are retweeted and shared more than real news and moderate views on Twitter, may sound like a bad thing, but it actually means that the credibility question becomes more important. In our own survey in Nepal, we've seen that Twitter, Facebook, the credibility of social media is actually very low, even though a lot of people look at it. So although viewership is high, credibility is low, which means when they watch fake news or they look at a video that looks sensational, they look at it, but they don't necessarily believe it. We may have to, fine-tune that survey a little more, but it is encouraging. Yeah, and then the news about Nepal. I don't know how many of you are interested in the whole history of the recent political changes, but we now have a new constitution. Relations with India and China are now more balanced, and we actually have a united left government, which is we're being ruled by communists, which doesn't really mean much because they're actually crony capitalists. But we're looking to more stability in the coming 4 or 5 years under the new constitution.
And Riaz, you deal with your curly questions.
I think Dipinder's, if I'm not, question about Sufi and Wahhabi traditions. Sociology, as a sociologist, I think the religion is a human invention, human creation. And Islam in South Asia has followed a particular tradition I've written, but it's essentially Islam which was spread by Sufis through the shrines and through various orders that came out of that. And it took root in India, in South Asia, because it sort of, in that environment, Islam offered a kind of alternative to what was the Orthodox Hinduism. And it was a bit more egalitarian. I mean, there are historical factors that have actually provided Islam a permanent root in South Asia. Now, in both Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, in all religion, there is a popular tradition and the more orthodox tradition. And research that, at least that I have done and that I'm familiar with, appears that orthodoxy of religious beliefs increases with literacy, with urban residents, and work in modern sector of economy. Now, if these variables have validity on the basis of work that I have done and others have done, then you could expect a more puritanical Orthodox Islam. And it's very interesting. If you look at, for example, the support of political parties in India, they actually, the more educated people, urban residents and well-to-do people are supporting actually more Hindu nationalist parties. In Pakistan, it is a bit more complex. But the trend is the same in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Pakistan. So I don't think Wahhabi, of course Wahhabi Islam got boost because of the money that came from Saudi Arabia, and it has been, but I wouldn't read it. Wahhabi Islam essentially is a particularly political, as a political Islam which has come as a result of the influence of Saudi Arabia. But I think I would like to just make as a general rule, the Sufi Islam will remain as a popular tradition, and it will then move. A lot of people will move out of it to Orthodox Islam, and eventually, what will happen, what is happening in Christianity, a lot of people are moving out of Christianity into no religion. So this is habits of the heart. You move from in all monotheistic religion, there is this shift from the community to orthodoxy, and then back to the community. But very simply, there are sociological factors that actually explain orthodoxy, not purely the Wahhabi influence. And the sociological factors are increasing literacy, urban residence, and sector in modern work in modern economy. I think most people don't realize that literacy has a profound effect, cognitive effect on human, in the way we think. In non-literate society, most of reproduction occurs through word of mouth. And so the storyteller can actually change the story depending on the audience. In literate society, the storyteller has no choice because the listener can go and check the text. And so only in literate society you have the development of cynicism and criticism. And as cynicism and criticism increases with literacy, it also affects not only religion but also politics. Pakistan is one of the most skeptical society, particularly in urban areas. In fact, there's a book that had come out by Navida Khan, which actually has a title, Islam and Skepticism in Pakistan. Now, the other issue about democracy, I think, Professor Mitra, you are a distinguished scholar of politics. I won't argue with you, but I think I would defer to your judgment. By my understanding of democracy, as it has developed in the modern world, liberal democracy was essentially a state. A liberal state is a state which actually wanted to be a neutral referee in the class conflict. I mean, that's my understanding of. And some of the most liberal democracies are the most, they have done some terrible thing. And colonialism was carried out by liberal democratic regimes. And it was one of the worst kind of exploitation, human exploitation and racism that we have experienced. Australia, United States, they are very liberal democracies, but we have one of the worst the way we treat our native people is hardly I mean, that what we have done for 200 years, we didn't even accept in Australia that Aboriginal people lived on the soil. Now, the way my understanding is that my understanding of democracy is related to Weberian notion, modernity. And what democracy does, and democracy that we probably see in South Asia, is to essentially look at the institutional functioning, that when institutions are allowed to function autonomously of any other influence, economy can function, religious can function, law can function without other institutions actually impinging on them. I think the institutional autonomy is very important. And this is why I think the democratic tradition that will evolve in the world would not be the reproduction of the Western model of liberal democracy, which essentially was a state which was a neutral referee between class conflicts, between conflicting classes, between different classes. The modern democracy, whether it's in China, very developed, India is one very good example of that you provide autonomy to institutions which are important for delivering goods and services and well-being to people, so that they can continue without actually without their being influenced by other institutions.
Thank you. And I think perhaps on that note, in the interest of keeping to our program, we should close. But I think in their remarks just now, the three panelists have probably answered the bigger question about where, in terms of democracy in South Asia, is it going to flourish? Is it going to wither? I think they've given you enough clues to their views on that particular topic. Probably their answer is they don't know, but they have profound feelings and sensations about one direction or another. Sanjay has been unequivocal, I think, in saying that India is more democratic now than previously. Riaz suggests that democracy, even in places that are not normally perceived as particularly democratic, like Pakistan, is achieving a form that may not equate to the liberal democracy that he describes in Australia or the United States, but is nevertheless still on a path towards greater participation and greater fair treatment of the people living within a state's boundaries. Kunda, have you got any thoughts since I've summed up the other
media? Not about democracy.
Not about democracy.
But democracy and press freedom are two sides of the same coin. So if press freedom is weak, then democracy gets weaker. And I think the trend in South Asia, to answer the question, is actually that press freedom is under threat in all the countries. The only bright spot was this week's overturning of the fake news bill in India, which hopefully is a trend. But if it's true that press freedom is being eroded, then I think it's actually a threat to democracy.
Thank you. And with that, please join me in thanking the panelists, and we'll turn things back to our MC.
Thank you, Professor Jeffrey, and our distinguished panelists. Professor Jeffrey will now present tokens of our appreciation to our invited speakers. First, Professor Sanjay Kumar. And Mr. Kunda Dixit.